Welcome back to Half-Ass Off-Grid. This afternoon I'm going to cover a topic that a few people I know personally, as well as a few of our tens of subscribers, have asked us, why are you prepping? Just why are you prepping for emergencies? Well, let's get into that a little bit. So basically, the truth of the matter is my wife and I are government workers. And that's why some people think it's so weird. It's like, oh my gosh, you're government workers. Why are you prepping? Well, I'll explain it. So a little background. My area of expertise is public works. I deal with infrastructure. Done it for 30 some years. My wife's area of expertise is government finance. She deals with finance, government finance, which is different than your checkbook. And she's been doing it for about 20 years. So a lot of times people are like, well, why would a government worker even bother prepping? So we'll start with our training. In 30 years of working in infrastructure, and especially in the years after 9/11, I have been to many local health department trainings, FEMA trainings, and EPA trainings. And my wife has been to many trainings regarding what happens to finances when the power goes out, for example. That brings us to our next thing. What kind of emergencies do we prep for? Well, where we live in the Pacific Northwest, there's already been groups of so-called anarchists that have decided that it's a good idea to go after substations. So you have power grid loss. We also live in an area with a lot of wildfires, which not only can take down the grid, it can take down your life. It can literally burn down your village. One of the things that you have to consider when you have a power loss is if you live in a town and you have municipal water or a water association or whatever, we'll just use municipal water for an example, you're going to have roughly 72 hours before you don't have water. So first you lose your power, then you lose your water. Well, once you lose your water and have no ability to feed by gravity and the generators have run out of diesel, your sanitation goes next. So you can get in a pretty crappy situation pretty quick. So after your 72 hours, what are you going to be doing for your food, your water, your shelter? And do you know what to do in that emergency? A lot of people rely on their cell phones very heavily. Do you have a way to charge your cell phone when the grid's out? Do you have a battery bank, a solar charger? Your car's only going to work for so long. So these are things to consider. The number one thing I'm going to focus on is a disruption to the power grid, because that's something everybody can relate to. So after your 72 hours are up, we'll say you get another day where you have water and sanitation, and then you're on your own. What materials do you have at home to get you through this situation? It's not as easy as one might think, but it's really not that hard either. So the basics you're going to need are water, food, shelter. Those are the three most important things. Water, the human body can go without water for about 7 days before you die. Food, about 30 days. Shelter, it depends on the situation. We have a big power outage here and it's wintertime. Hopefully you have alternate sources of heat. But let's stick to the basics here. So your water. Do you have water in your house? A lot of people don't. You know, this could send you down the situation where you have, one flush of water left in your tank. Maybe you were really quick and filled your bathtub with water, and that's all the water you have for cooking and sanitation. That's a big task on 50 gallons of water. So you should probably have some way to either treat water from a water source or have your own water. Water is going to be the toughest one. I don't even know how you would do it in some areas. Luckily, here in the Pacific Northwest, yes, it's dry, but there are water sources. We have a water source next to our house, or not very far from our house, and a water source not very far from our cabin. Problem is, you're not going to just go and stick a straw in it. You're going to have to treat it. But that's another conversation for another day. So let's get into your food. So if you have a month's worth of food, let's say, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to be feeling very insecure. So you're going to eat all of the good tasting, fun, security, familiar foods that you can first. That's just human nature. And the training I've had reinforces that. The problem is when you get down to the nitty gritty and you have a bag of beans and a bag of rice, how are you going to make that palatable? Because if you don't make it palatable, A, you're not going to eat it and get the nourishment out of it. And B, you're going to make bad decisions because you're in a critical situation and you're not thinking straight. That could be taking risks that you shouldn't take. That could be just, some people could just, roll over and die. Some people could get violent. You don't know. But being able to cook things and make it palatable and make it comfortable is huge psychologically in an emergency situation. I mean, that's why in the Middle Ages, spices were so important. They covered up the taste of spoiling meat and made things taste different. It's like every once in a while you have a piece of meat and you're like, oh, great, I had a piece of meat. Let's try something different. For the love of God, try something different. So those are things to consider with your water and your food. Your shelter. Do you have a safe place to be? Are you in a house? Are you in an apartment? Are you out in the middle of nowhere? Generally speaking, if you're in a larger metropolitan or municipal area, there's going to be a lot of people out there that can go either way. Either they're going to help you or they're going to try and take your stuff. So that's something to consider too. Out where we live, even where our house is, there's a lot of people out here that are in the same position as us and have a lot of the same value systems that we have. So it's not such a big deal. I don't know if I would want to be in an emergency situation lasting longer than a couple of weeks in some of the towns that are close to here, but that's neither here nor there. You need to have a secure place to be, and that security is kind of up to you. We'll touch on that a little bit later in the video here. One of the things to consider having that I think you should invest a lot of money in, and part of this is because I have been injured far away from a doctor before, you need to have a first aid kit. And I mean a real first aid kit, like a first aid kit and a trauma kit, not a 99-cent Target first aid kit that your kid carries to second grade. You need to have serious first aid stuff. You need to have things like a tourniquet. You need to have quick clot. You need to have combat gauze. You need to have gauze to pack wounds with. You have to have a way to sanitize things. Chest seals are a good thing. And most importantly, I can't stress this enough, you have to know how to use it. And in a lot of these situations, a lot of people, like I said, they take risks. Train yourself. Train yourself safety-wise. Learn how to move safely. A few years back, I was in a propane explosion inside a camper. And probably the only thing that really, truly saved my life is industrial safety training. Exhale and cover your face. Stop, drop, and roll and get out. That's how I got out. I still had second and third degree burns on my face and my hands, but I'm alive. And my airway was secure. So be trained. Get a very, very good first aid kit. And like I say, don't skimp, and don't forget your gauze for packing wounds. You hit your leg with a chainsaw, you may need a tourniquet, and you may have to pack that wound just to get enough pressure on it to make it stop. So that is something I believe in, and I think that is very, very important. So now let's say you're making it through this emergency. You're safe, you're secure, you're well fed, you're as happy as you can be, you're making good decisions, and your food supply is getting low. There's things you can do and you should learn to do to make yourself more resilient. These are things like becoming a hunter, a gatherer, a fisherman, whatever you want to call it. But it can make a big difference. A lot of people think, well, I don't live out in the country, so what am I going to forage? You would be amazed of the edibles that you can find in the city. I mean, there's a half dozen weeds, everything from broadleaf plantain to purslane, that people randomly spray in their lawns that you can find in an urban setting. You get out into a more rural area, you have small game, big game, Well, shoot, if you open your mind, you do have some small game running around cities too. You just have to be able to mentally eat it. But those are things to consider. Another thing to consider, do you have a garden? Can you grow stuff? Do you have a stash of seeds? Do you have chickens, goats, anything like that? I mean, here we don't have a lot, but we have a dozen chickens and we have a rooster. And the reason we specifically have the rooster is so we can produce more chickens. So we get our eggs currently now, but as long as we can keep them fed, we can grow chickens. So, you know, it's a stable protein source. It's not a huge amount. Like I said, it's just 12, but it would make a difference. If you get into hunting and foraging and gathering, do you know how to preserve that meat or those vegetables that you bring home? Do you know how to dry things? That's something you should look into. Do you have salt at home to preserve your meat with? Can you smoke it? I mean, this is not a game of alone. This is for keeps out here. If you end up in a big situation and the grid is down for a month, 2 months, 3 months, how do you become more resilient? So now let's say that you've mastered a little bit of hunting and gathering and procuring of your own food. Let's talk about security. What are you willing to do to keep that? Remember, if you shoot some random warm-blooded animal and you preserve it, you salt preserve it, you cure it, you smoke it, you just simply air dry it like biltong, how do you keep it secure? Remember, you don't have electricity, you don't have lights at night, and you don't have refrigeration, so you put a lot of time and effort into that meat. How do you secure it? Are you a booby trap person? Are you confident with a firearm? That's going to be up to you. I know what I do, but let's just say I'll keep that to myself for right now, but it's something you definitely should consider. And if you are a firearm type person, a box of shells isn't going to do you much good, because if you're out there shaking because you're nutrient deficient, it's going to take you more than one shot to get whatever you're shooting at, and you can burn up your ammunition pretty fast. So remember to have enough to handle meat procurement and security if that's the path that you take. So now let's talk about bugging out. I don't know about you guys, but I've seen an awful lot of TV shows where people build bug out bunkers and buy property that's, you know, a couple 100 miles away. Hell, we got a cabin that's an hour and a half away from here. Is it realistic to bug out? Well, here's my opinion. And if you got comments, we all know there's a comment section here. But in my opinion, if you are planning on bugging out from your primary residence to another place, not only do you have to consider all of the things that you have at your primary residence, all of the things that you have stashed at your other residence, there's one little caveat. If there's no power, and I'm pretty sure everybody at this point, if you're considering bugging out, has pillaged all of the gas stations, how do you get there? Anybody? Guy in the back? How do you get there? Because if you have no gas in your vehicles and no way to get gas, you're not getting there. Unless you have horses, dog sled, or you just want to hoof it. And I'm here to tell you, I don't think it's realistic for a lot of people, because if you look at the people that can move large amounts of survival gear, you know, they're in the military, they're in peak shape, and they're trained to move that gear and secure it at the same time. And they have a lot of diesel and they have a lot of feet. So as far as bugging out, I don't know if it's realistic, but there again, that's up to you. But one thing to consider, if you are at your bug out shelter and something does go down, be sure you have all the stuff you need to take care of yourself there too, including that trauma kit. So in closing, if you made it clear through this video, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you listening. But I'm here to tell you that if you're a government worker, you're probably prepping. And if you're wondering why government workers are always prepping, it's because our experience with logistics and our training tells us it's the smart thing to do. It's not because we have inside information. I mean, that information is always smeared all over the internet. But consider, it can get really ugly really quick. And one thing that my wife brought up a while back that I didn't add in here, but I'm going to. Do you have a plan for recovering from a situation like this? If you're an average American, most of your money is tied up in a bank, for example, and most of that is done online with power. Let's say that the power grid comes up and your information is lost. Is all of your wealth tied up in a bank? When it comes back up, are you going to have your wealth? Are you going to have the things that you had that are recorded on the internet, for example, or in the cloud? Those are things to consider as well. You have to have a plan for recovery, and nobody really talks about that. And hopefully, if this video goes well, maybe we'll put out one on recovery, because it's a fascinating subject. Something like this can really ruin lives, and I know there's a large portion of our country that go through things like hurricanes and tornadoes, and it takes them years to recover. There's wildfires in the West. It takes years to recover. And it's not just you or your mental health that has to recover, it's your entire lifestyle. So these are things to consider, and it's just a little video I put together because people ask us all the time, well, you're government workers, what are you worried about? Why do you prep? Well, I hope if you made it through this, now you know why, and I would recommend that it's a smart thing for anybody to do. It's always a good idea to be prepared because you never know what's happening. So thank you for watching, and I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions or comments, or if there's anything you'd like to see me talk about on this subject, feel free to put it in the comments. Don't forget, find your balance.